Hello and welcome to the Researcher Podcast, your regular look at the research that's making waves in the scientific community and the people behind it. My name is Joe Fenton and I will be your host. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Rick Tykwinski from the University of Alberta. Rick was recently a speaker at the University of Oxford's Curo-Pi conference. Before we begin, let me give you a quick introduction to the Curo-Pi conference. This year marked the third edition of this specific conference. Hosted by Professor Harry Anderson at the University of Oxford, this international symposium discussed the latest developments in the chemistry and physics of pi-conjugated molecules. So today, we'll be finding out a bit more about the conference, as well as Rick and his Curo-Pi presentation. Rick, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
So before we get into the conference and your research that you presented at the conference, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your academic career so far?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've been a professor, I guess, for a little bit more than 20 years, split between the University of Alberta, where I am now, and Erlangen in Germany. And for pretty much that entire time, I've worked along with my research group on what we call physical organic chemistry, which is just a fancy way of saying that we are interested in how a structure of a molecule affects its properties. And so we've made a wide variety of conjugated molecules and looked at how their absolute molecular structure affects the properties that they display, and hopefully, if we design them correctly, we can make them useful at some point.
So obviously you've been working on these molecules and looking at their properties and structures for a very long time now. So if we take a step back to maybe the beginning of your academic career, what made you interested, or if I rephrase the question, what motivated you to look at this specific research in the first place?
Motivated it. I mean, the best answer is curiosity, but the origin of the project is actually kind of ironic in the sense that when I was very young as an assistant professor, I was teaching what we call sophomore organic. So it's the first organic course that students take when they come to university. And if you go to pretty much any textbook that one would use for sophomore organic, you find great descriptions of diamond and sp3 carbon, and you find great descriptions of graphite and now graphene and the fullerenes and nanotubes and how wonderful they are. And then that's where it ends. And there's really, they describe acetylene, but there's no, what comes beyond that? What if you could make this molecule, or a polyion, a long polyion, or a carbine? What would be its properties? And so obviously diamond and graphite or graphene have fantastic properties, both of their own, as well as, industrially relevant properties. And so we were curious, could we make carbine and would it be useful? And so the initial motivation was, almost you could simplify it to simply answering this question in a general organic textbook. And it's more complicated than that, but I mean, that was some of our initial discussions is, could we put this into a textbook?
So as I mentioned in the introduction, you were recently a speaker at the University of Oxford's Curo-Pi conference. Could you tell us a little bit about the paper that you presented there?
Sure. It's the area that we're working in for that particular paper has to do with what happens if you take a polyion or something we call a cumulene, which is again made out of the same type of sp hybridized building blocks. And what happens if you bend it? So how does this affect its properties? And I mean, that's a simple question, but at the very end of this question or this hypothesis is what happens if you make a molecule that's a ring or a circle that's made only of these building blocks, because it's been predicted to have really fantastic properties. And this is I've known Harry Anderson, the organizer of the conference, for about 25 years. We were postdocs together in Switzerland. And Harry has always had an interest in these cyclic structures. And I knew he was working on it. And so this was some of the motivation to discuss with him his progress towards making the ultimate goal, but also to reveal what we found on small segments on it. As you take this molecule that wants to be linear and start to bend it and see what happens. Is it stable? Does it affect the properties? Can it be made synthetically? A lot of these are very fundamental questions, but they're really of the utmost importance. If you're going to take a graduate student and ask them to try to make the real thing, you should have at least a reasonable idea that it's possible.
So with this theoretical framework and your attempts to change the structure of these molecules, what can this lead to in either the real world, so to speak, or in the academic world?
The real world is much harder because most chemistry inventions or molecular inventions, it takes a while before they're actually found to be useful. I mean, this particular molecule, it would be a new form of carbon. So, I mean, it would go into the lineage of graphite, diamond, fullerenes, and then you'd have the cyclocarbons. And so fundamentally, it would be quite exciting because it's not every day that you can create a new form of carbon, in the time that either nature or man has been making molecules or materials. There's less than 10 different types of carbon approximately that you could classify, and this would be a new one. So fundamentally, it would just be an interest in, okay, now we've completed this series. How do the properties of carbine compare to graphene or diamond? But it's almost as much a synthetic success or a synthetic achievement, in the sense that we've targeted something that a lot of people would say couldn't be made, or Harry has targeted it, and it's been done. We've developed ways to cheat the system and make the molecules.
So conferences are a time when scientists can get together, they can discuss their findings and their research. So with your particular research, what kind of reception did you get from your peers and colleagues at the Curo-Pi conference?
Curiosity. That was the hoped response, in a sense that one of the reasons that I chose Curo-Pi was that I hadn't been to this is the third of the Curo-Pi series, and I had not been to the first two. But when I looked at the speakers of the first two, it seemed like a conference that would still put a large value on the synthetic efforts that go into making these molecules, and that the fact that you didn't have to defend it with putting it into a device or showing that you could sell it to industry. It was just a curiosity of what happens to molecules when you curve them or make them curved, which is the title of the conference. And so, when it was presented, there is obviously a link between what we were doing and what Harry's students were putting on posters at the posters session. And so there was a great discussion of, have you thought about this, or will you make them longer? Can you make them longer? Will they be stable? Will Harry's molecules be stable? And that was exactly the desired, what I had hoped, is that people would find what we were doing interesting and perhaps even motivate them to take on some aspect of this general area of chemistry.
Curiosity seems to be a key word for yourself, and it seems to be a staple of your academic career. So for a curious mind like yourself, who do you believe gave the most interesting presentation of their research whilst at Curo-Pi?
I was almost afraid of that question in the sense that it's really it's almost an impossible question to answer. But I'll give you two. The first talk was by a guy named Ken Itami from Nagoya in Japan, and the molecules that he's made and the ideas he's had for making graphene-like molecules and materials is always fantastic. And you can see him talk every 6 months, and he doesn't have to repeat anything because he's clever. He's got a great group, and the molecules that he puts out there, you'd look at them and say, this can never be made, and somehow he finds a way to make it. And so Ken was the plenary lecturer, and so, we expected him to be good, but it's always amazing. And then the last talk was from a researcher from Germany named Rainer Herges. And Rainer is one of the best physical organic chemists. I hope he doesn't take offense to me calling him that, but of our era, and that he decides he wants to do something. So at this point, he's looking at controlling the magnetic state of a molecule on a molecular sense, on a molecular scale. And this would be similar to the way many computer devices record memory. And so he's trying to do this on a molecular scale, and he's found a number of ways to do it, but he does it through understanding of every aspect of his molecules. And he gives a fantastic talk, because it could be a very complicated topic, but he finds a way to present it so that it draws the audience in, and you know exactly what he's thinking and why he did this, and perhaps why he didn't do something else. And so it's just really, when he's done, you're like, wow, that was good.
So obviously conferences are an important part of any academic's career. So just how influential have conferences been to yourself and your own academic development?
I guess I would change, instead of saying influential, I would say motivational. And in two ways, one is if one just sits in their own labs, in their own office, you somehow, it's exciting and it's still your chemistry, but it's only when you go out and find out that other people are interested in what we're doing that it really motivates you. It's like, oh, okay, so what I'm doing does have an impact, and people are interested to see what we're doing. And this is even more important for the students, because as a PhD student, you're typically focused on an endpoint. I need to make these molecules so I can get my PhD and I can get out of here. And they go to a conference, and other students and postdocs and professors engage them and start talking to them about their molecules, and tell them, oh yeah, I saw your paper. And so for a PhD student to have a professor from halfway around the world know of their research, this is incredibly motivating, and they often get good ideas from these people. These are experts in the field, and they'll come back from a conference with a whole list of things that we should do this, we should do that. And I mean, of course, we can't do everything, but the motivational aspect of it is absolutely fantastic.
I really like this idea of motivation being a key aspect to take away from conferences. So for any kind of PhDs or young academics who are attending their first conferences, do you have any advice for them so they, like yourself, can learn, talk, and return with more motivation than they had before they arrived?
To make the most of it, to talk to people, when you recognize a professor that comes up to your poster and there's that awkward 3 seconds of silence where they don't say anything and you don't say anything, find something to say, as simple as, can I tell you something about my poster? Or would you let me tell you something about my poster? Because, often that's all it takes. Sometimes they're just looking, but often, they'll say, yeah, I've seen this structure before. And that's the beginning of a conversation that might last 1 minute. It might last 10 minutes. But if you've engaged that person, you never know. That might be the person that you'll go on to do a postdoc with, or you'll leave the conference and you'll be on a bus and you'll be sitting next to this person, and you already have this beginning of a rapport with them, and you never know where it's going to lead. So don't just sit there and watch and look and be shy. And it's hard. I'm not naturally an outgoing person, and so it's hard for me to engage somebody just out of the blue. But find a way to do it. Summon up your suitcase of courage and find a way to do it.
So obviously, poster sessions are an instrumental part of conferences. So whilst walking around the Curo-Pi conference, were there any posters that really captured your interest? and sparked your curiosity at all?
Do you know where Harry had the poster session?
Was it not in the Natural History Museum?
It was. If you've ever been there, it's the absolute most fantastic venue for a poster session that I have ever seen at a conference, because there were literally poster boards at the feet of Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? And so that was the first thing that sparked my interest. But on a scientific level, the level of the posters was absolutely incredible. I mean, the students that were there were obviously very proud of what they had done. And not just the students. I mean, the postdocs and the faculty that presented, and all of them had interesting molecules, interesting properties, interesting correlations between the structure and function. I think probably the most global aspect of it is simply that you look at the molecules that have been made and they're up on these posters, and you really think, wow, 10 years ago, nobody would have ever thought we could have made a segment of graphene that's built up out of 120 carbon atoms. It's just synthetically, we're moving so quickly and so efficiently towards new systems. It's really, really incredible.
So as you say, molecules and chemistry in general has advanced a lot over the last 10 years. Well, have conferences changed at all in the last, say, 10, 20, possibly even 30 years?
Some have. I mean, there's a lot of conferences that are now organized commercially, so that the idea of the conference is to make money for some company. And a lot of, not a lot, but a fair number of people will go to these because they're in a beautiful venue, or there's a particular set of speakers that the conference has organized to draw people there. I mean, so I would say that's a change that you wouldn't have seen 20 years ago. You wouldn't have seen for-profit conferences in that particular, or commercial conferences. And I think what's happened is so people are drawn often to, and more recently to smaller conferences, much like the Curo-Pi. I think Harry said that there were about 140 people or 150 people that attended this. And so, people want to, researchers want to go where you don't have to choose between which session you go to listen to, if you want to listen to both people, but they're at the same time, you have to choose. Whereas a smaller conference, there's only one talk at any given time, and you can just sit down and you can listen and you can think and you can interact with everybody at the conference, and actually participate. It's that you're not just there as a spectator, you're there to participate, and you're welcomed into it because it's a small group of people.
So these smaller conferences contain less amount of people, but the subject is sort of experts in a very niche area.
I was gonna say it might be, or it might be a way for a person to find, maybe I want to change direction. So the project that I presented at Curo-Pi, we haven't really worked in that particular area in about 10 years. And so I saw Curo-Pi as a way to enter back into this curved conjugated molecule community. And so, maybe it's not my area of expertise or somebody's area of expertise at any given time, but it's a great way to jump into the area and say, yeah, here I am. Here's what I'm doing. Do you like it?
Well, I've attended a couple of conferences now, obviously through researcher rather than as an academic, but I've never even considered the use of conferences for this. And I guess it's another really good piece of advice for anybody, any young PhD or any young academic who wants to jump in and do exactly as you were saying. Well, with conferences being global and obviously having travelled from the University of Alberta to the University of Oxford, and I'm guessing you've also been to many other cities, how much time do you get to explore the city that the conference is hosted in?
Sometimes a reasonable amount if I have a friend or a particular place, or somebody will actually organize a field trip or something, a time to go see a landmark that is in that particular city. But the probably the worst kept secret of conferences is that most professors, as they run out of time trying to balance work and their family, spend a rather unfortunate amount of time in their hotel room trying to get their talk ready for the presentation the next day. And often we lose out just because it's we've got things to do. It's a nice quiet hotel room and we can actually get things done. And so, it's sometimes we don't see anything, but that's a choice. It's a choice that we make because we're as a group quite motivated to succeed, and so we take that free time, if you will, that where nobody's asking us for anything. Often we don't have a telephone ringing or emails, and we take it to think about our research, to think about our talk, and sometimes we miss some of the local the local offerings. Although, invariably we end up walking around in the evening for dinner and finding a nice a pub or a nice bar somewhere in the town, and that's often our exposure to the local culture. And Oxford was no different.
Yeah, of course, because we attended the 255th ACS conference hosted in New Orleans, and as you say, it was very much New Orleans by night. So walking around trying to find a restaurant or a bar, and that is how you soak up the local culture, I guess.
I mean, you can't go there without going and checking it out.
Yeah, it's really true. So I'm going to move on to the personal questions section of this particular podcast and ask you, throughout your whole career, starting as a young academic and even at the stage you're at now, who has been the most influential for yourself and your work?
I think there have been people that have influenced my career as I became, or after I became an academic, but I think, much like a child is often influenced by their parents to the greatest extent. For me, that would be true of my academic career. I was fortunate from this is my second year in university to be involved with Professor Ron Capel when I was an undergraduate. Got me hooked on research, gave me opportunities, let me fail and learn from it. My PhD supervisor, Peter Stang, gave me the resources and the guidance and the opportunity to develop my own ideas. Francois Diederich is almost a legend in producing academic people, just because of I don't even know, I can't even say, but I mean Harry Anderson moved through his group. We've seen where Harry's ended up. He somehow motivates you to act on your curiosity, much like my son would ask me, why is the grass green? On a chemistry level, Francois somehow teaches people how to ask questions that other people are interested in, and challenges us to find ways to solve these questions, and gives us the motivation to actually to do it, and say, and to, even if there isn't an obvious use for it, if the question is significant enough, that's good enough, right? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be able to sell it to make money off of it for it to be important. So I'd say, my three mentors throughout my education by far, and still influence me today.
So obviously you've had a very, very successful academic career. Do you have any advice or tips or tricks for any PhD students or young academics to increase their productivity?
I wish there were. I almost don't increase efficiency too quickly, because what happened for me is I became so efficient in my early career that I was running at about 100% efficiency, at least from what I could tell. And then I had children, and because I was so efficient, there was no room for increasing efficiency and the time that I wanted to dedicate to my kids, I had to just simply take from somewhere else. And so just keep a perspective, right? Efficiency and more productivity is maybe not always the best thing. Try to balance it. I mean, I love biking. I love mountain biking. And so I make an effort almost every day to either commute into work or to have fun and not forget that, there's other things besides my research that are important, and especially my family. Family should always come first. Don't give that up, because at the end of the day, another Angewandte paper is far less important than a parent-teacher conference or watching your kid's first violin recital, no matter how painful it might be.
So in your introduction, you said that you have been a professor for, 20 years now? So obviously you've supervised many PhD students and you've seen many young academics begin their career. And obviously yourself, you've been in academia for some time now, so you know how it works fundamentally. So what would be your one piece of advice for somebody starting their PhD, or for somebody who is just beginning their academic career?
It sounds, for a PhD student, it sounds kind of cliche, but make sure you love your project. Make it your project, because if you're just doing it because somebody told you need to do it, or somebody told you that this is the best way to get a job, but you're not excited about the question you're asking, or you're not excited about the molecules you're making, then you're really missing out on an opportunity to make something yours, right? Your PhD research, by the time you're done, you should be the world expert on it, and it should be yours, and you should be able to sit back and say, wow, look at what I did. That's really cool. I'm really proud of that. And the same thing to an academic. As you're starting out, by that time you've probably identified what it is that you love, and it's your students, recognizing that all students that come into your new PhD students don't immediately share your enthusiasm or your motivation or your dedication, but show them that this is the way to do it. Encourage them, realize that they're all different, find out how to motivate each one of them individually, and if you can do that even with your first couple of students, then you're well on your way to a great career.
Well, thank you so much for that piece of advice. Well, that's just all we've got time for today on the Researcher Podcast. We've been joined by Professor Rick Tykwinski from the University of Alberta. Rick, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening, everyone. Until next time. You've been listening to the Researcher Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Alternatively, you can find us at www.researcher-app.com, or if you fancy, you can drop me an email at joseph.fenton@researcherapp.com. Researcher is free to download on iOS, Android, or via your web browser.